Hi, everyone. Quick one for you. Make sure you subscribe and like before we start. Thank you. There was a time when everything in my life felt like it was in perfect order, a state of symmetry that gave me a sense of security. Emma and I had been married for 7 years, and during that time, we built what appeared to be an ideal life together. Our home, nestled in an affluent neighborhood, was just a symbol of the stability we both craved. We had a comfortable rhythm, a shared routine that anchored our days, and from the outside, we were the perfect couple. I took pride in the life we created. Emma was always so polished, so composed. Her career in real estate suited her well. She thrived on presenting an image of control, elegance, and poise. People admired her, envied us. I'd often hear whispers at social gatherings about how we were the perfect couple. It was a narrative I believed in, or at least I wanted to. But lately, there were cracks in the image I had built for us. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in Emma's behavior that I couldn't quite ignore. Her phone, for instance, was suddenly a fixture in her hand. She guarded it with an intensity that wasn't there before, always angled away from me as if it held secrets I wasn't meant to see. It wasn't just the phone. She had started coming home later with excuses that didn't quite add up. Another client meeting, she'd say, her voice calm, rehearsed. I tried not to read too much into it. After all, she was successful, and success required time, didn't it? Still, I noticed. The late nights, the way she would smile at me, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Little lies, I told myself. Nothing worth confronting. I wasn't the type to make impulsive accusations. Besides, we had a son, Ethan, and I couldn't disrupt our life just because of a few gut feelings. Ethan was only 5, and I wanted him to grow up in the stability I never had. That was what mattered, protecting him, protecting our home. But even Ethan seemed to sense something I was unwilling to fully acknowledge. "Mommy has a new friend," he said one evening as we sat at the dinner table. I looked up from my plate, frowning at him as he toyed with his food. Emma didn't react, her eyes fixed on her phone as she pretended not to hear. "What do you mean, buddy? Yeah, me, buddy," I asked, trying to sound amused, though something in my chest tightened. "At school," Ethan continued, his small voice filled with the innocent clarity of a child. "She said she has a friend." I glanced at Emma then, but she remained absorbed in her phone, not even bothering to acknowledge the conversation. I told myself Ethan was imagining things, repeating something he must have overheard. Kids say the darndest things, don't they? I smiled and let it go, but the seed was planted. A subtle shift had already started in my mind, though I tried to bury it beneath the layers of our routines. At night, as I lay in bed beside her, I replayed these moments in my mind. I could feel a growing distance between us, an invisible wall that she had built and fortified over time. Still, I didn't want to be that paranoid husband, the one who snoops and suspects without reason. But the signs were there. They had been for weeks, maybe longer. I just hadn't allowed myself to see them clearly. I loved her. Or maybe it was more accurate to say I loved the life we had, the life I had crafted around the idea of us. Emma had been a part of that, integral to the image. And maybe that's what hurt the most, the realization that the foundation of what I believed in was no longer solid. It wasn't until I noticed her deleting messages on her phone, casually like it meant nothing, that the unease took root in a way I couldn't ignore. She thought I hadn't noticed, that her quick fingers erasing something as she laughed about some trivial story had escaped me. But I saw it and chose once again not to act, not yet. The unease followed me, creeping into the corners of my mind, gnawing at the edges of every interaction we had. Every time she smiled at me, every time she reached out to hold my hand, I couldn't help but wonder what lay behind her smile, behind her touch. Was it guilt? Or worse, indifference? I started watching, but quietly. That's how I operate, methodically, strategically. I didn't want to confront her, not until I knew, not until I had more than just suspicions. So I waited, all the while pretending everything was fine. I smiled when I had to, played the loving husband as the unease churned inside me, deeper with each passing day. Emma didn't know that I was already beginning to see the cracks in the life she thought she had hidden so well. The perfect life was no longer perfect. And deep down, I knew that soon I would find the truth. When I did, I wouldn't confront her like some pathetic, wounded husband. No, I would wait. I would calculate, and I would make sure she paid. It happened on an evening like any other. I had no intention of coming home early. Work had been relentless that week, and staying late had become routine. But an unexpected break in the schedule gave me an opportunity, and I decided to surprise Emma with dinner from her favorite restaurant. A small gesture, really, but I thought it might help bridge the growing distance between us. An effort, however subtle, to return to the life we once had. As I stepped through the front door, I heard her voice. At first, it was muffled, casual, the way she always spoke when on the phone with a client. But then a brief silence, and something in her tone changed, softened, almost tender. It wasn't the tone she used with me. My footsteps slowed as I moved through the house. I didn't announce my presence. I just listened. No, don't worry about it. He won't be home for hours, she said, her voice low but confident. There was a faint laugh. I can't wait either. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow. She hung up before I reached the doorway to the living room, where she sat curled up on the couch, phone in hand, staring at it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, her body stiffened. Her reaction was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but after years of marriage, I knew her well enough to spot the flicker of tension. You're home early, she said, a bright smile quickly replacing the momentary unease. What a nice surprise. I smiled back, though my mind was already spinning. Who was she talking to? Why had her entire demeanor changed when she realized I was there? My instinct screamed at me to question her, to demand answers, but I forced myself to stay calm. Confronting her now would achieve nothing. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. The rest of the evening was a blur. We sat together for dinner, though my appetite had vanished. I played my part as the loving husband, listening to her recount her day, the mundane details of her real estate business. She was good at this, at weaving a narrative of normalcy. But my mind was elsewhere, already planning my next move. Later that night, as she showered, I made my way to her phone. She always kept it with her, so this was a rare opportunity. I didn't have much time, but I didn't need much. A quick search through her messages revealed the truth I'd been dreading. There, in the thread with a contact named Daniel, was the proof of her betrayal. Intimate messages, plans for secret meetings, and phrases that made my stomach churn. My first reaction was one of visceral pain, a punch to the gut that left me momentarily paralyzed. She had been with him for months, months in which I had been blind, believing our growing distance was just a phase. But this was different. This was calculated. She had orchestrated this affair while still playing the part of my wife, and I had been none the wiser. I closed my eyes, willing the initial wave of anger to pass. I couldn't allow myself to react emotionally. Not now. I needed clarity. I needed control. I locked the phone and placed it back where I found it, just as I heard the water stop in the bathroom. When she emerged, her smile was as radiant as ever, as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In that moment, I realized my love for her had been tainted. Not destroyed, not yet, but irreparably damaged. And with that realization came a cold, quiet rage. I couldn't let her know that I knew. Not yet. I needed time to plan. I would destroy her, but it had to be methodical, precise, and devastating. The following days were difficult, but I managed to maintain my composure. I watched her more closely now, noting the small lies she told, the moments when she seemed distant, the times she claimed to be working late. Each time she looked me in the eyes and lied, I filed it away in my mind as fuel for what I knew had to come. But I wouldn't act impulsively. No, that would only give her power. If I exploded in anger, if I confronted her without proof, she would manipulate the situation. She would twist it until I was the irrational, paranoid husband, and I couldn't allow that. Instead, I began to gather my evidence, starting with the messages I had found. I copied them to a hidden folder on my computer, backing them up so that they couldn't disappear if she ever got suspicious. My plan took shape in the quiet hours of the night, lying beside her as she slept. I would unravel her life piece by piece, starting with the things she held most dear: her reputation, her career, her sense of control. She thrived on the image she presented to the world, and that's where I would strike first. But it had to be perfect. Every move I made had to be deliberate, every step calculated. There would be no room for error. A few weeks later, I took another step. I had long since memorized her phone passcode, so while she slept one night, I unlocked it and installed a hidden app that allowed me to monitor her texts and calls remotely. Now I didn't have to sneak around to see what she was doing. I could track everything in real time. Every conversation she had with Daniel was laid bare for me to see. They were planning a weekend getaway soon to a hotel in the city. Perfect. With the knowledge of their upcoming rendezvous, I took action. I booked a room at the same hotel, 2 floors above where they planned to meet. But I wasn't going to confront them. No, that would be far too simple. Instead, I would use this as another opportunity to gather more evidence. I contacted a private investigator, someone discreet and efficient, who could capture photos and videos without ever being noticed. By the time their weekend was over, I would have all the proof I needed. I didn't speak a word of this to Emma, of course. Our interactions remained cordial, even affectionate at times, though every touch, every kiss felt like a lie. She had no idea that I was watching her, that I was building the case that would eventually bring her down. She thought she was in control, thought she was clever, but she was playing a game far beyond her understanding. The weekend came and went. I had the photos, the videos, enough to destroy her if I wanted to. But it wasn't time yet. I needed more. Emma wasn't just going to lose her marriage, she was going to lose everything. I wanted to see her entire world crumble. Over the next few weeks, I began subtly withdrawing money from our joint accounts, transferring it into one she couldn't access. I also started researching divorce lawyers, quietly preparing for the moment when I would make my move. Emma had no idea, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Every day, she continued her affair, oblivious to the fact that I was meticulously dismantling her life behind her back. The moment of revelation would come soon, but not yet. I had to be patient, had to wait for the perfect opportunity to unleash everything I had gathered. When that moment came, it would be devastating. She would have no defense, no way to twist the narrative in her favor, and I would be the one in control. For now, I would play the part of the loving, unsuspecting husband, biding my time, watching her unravel in ways she couldn't even comprehend. Each passing day brought me closer to the inevitable, and when it finally happened, it would be on my terms. Emma wouldn't see it coming. The days following my discovery were the hardest, but they were necessary. I learned to keep a mask in place, perfected the art of pretending. My world had shattered, but Emma would never know that. I had to stay composed. If she caught even the slightest hint of my knowledge, it would ruin everything. Her downfall required precision, patience, and above all, control. I couldn't rush this. The first thing I did was gather as much information as possible. I had the messages between her and Daniel, but I needed more. Something irrefutable, undeniable, something that would leave no room for excuses or manipulation. Emma was clever, I knew that. If I gave her an inch, she'd twist the narrative and make herself the victim. So I went to work. I installed covert cameras around the house, starting with the living room and our bedroom, places I knew they'd eventually meet. I made sure they were well hidden, blending seamlessly into the decor. No one would ever notice. In addition, I planted a GPS tracker on Emma's car. Every time she left the house, I could monitor her movements from my phone. At night, while she slept soundly beside me, I scoured through the footage and tracked her every move. It was methodical, detached, almost clinical. I wasn't just trying to catch her in the act, I was building an ironclad case, piece by piece, Daniel. That name had become a poison in my mind. I needed to know everything about him, his background, his connections, his vulnerabilities. Emma may have thought he was the perfect lover, but no one is perfect. Everyone has cracks. I dug into his life like a surgeon opening up a body, looking for weak points. He was well regarded in his field, kept a clean public image, but there were small things, an old financial dispute, a quiet settlement with an ex-colleague over some misunderstanding. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It told me he wasn't untouchable. That was all I needed. I also began subtly altering my behavior around Emma. I encouraged her to take more business trips, to spend time with her friends, or go to events she'd normally decline. I played the role of the supportive husband, always smiling, always understanding. The more freedom I gave her, the more she thought she was getting away with it. But she wasn't. Every move she made, I was there, watching, recording, waiting. Emma's affair was reckless, but her carelessness was what struck me the most. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of aftershave that wasn't mine. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. Or maybe she didn't think I'd notice. I would smile, ask her about her day, and she'd tell me the same lies she had been telling for months. Little did she know, I already had hours of footage, countless text messages, and GPS logs of every place she and Daniel had met. She had no idea that the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, I started the legal preparations. Quietly, I consulted a lawyer, a friend from my university days who specialized in high-stakes divorces. He advised me on how to position my assets, how to make sure Emma couldn't touch them once the time came. The house, the accounts, the investments. I began shifting everything out of reach, ensuring that when I finally made my move, she'd be left with nothing. Emma would soon realize the life she thought she had built was a lie, just like the one she had been feeding me. As my plan took shape, I could feel a growing sense of power. Each day that passed without Emma knowing the truth was a victory, a step closer to her ruin. And the best part was how oblivious she remained. She thought she was in control, thought she had the upper hand, but I was always one step ahead. I played the part of the loving, trusting husband, while she continued her deceit, blind to the fact that her time was running out. The final stroke was coming, but I had to wait for the perfect moment. That's when Emma brought Daniel into our social circles, introducing him as a business partner at a charity event we attended together. She was bold now, almost daring. I watched as they exchanged glances, subtle touches, thinking they were invisible to the world. It was almost insulting how little regard she had for me, but I didn't react. I couldn't. Instead, I smiled, shook Daniel's hand, and pretended not to notice. The opportunity I had been waiting for presented itself when Emma told me she was planning a family gathering at our house. She wanted to host a dinner with some close friends, including Daniel, of course. I told her it was a great idea. I even suggested inviting Samantha, Daniel's fiancée, whom I had met briefly once. Emma hesitated at first, but then agreed, perhaps thinking that it would add another layer of security to their secret. I knew better. That dinner would be the stage for my final act. In the days leading up to the event, I contacted Samantha. It wasn't difficult. Social media makes it easy to find anyone these days. I met her for coffee under the pretense of wanting to know more about Daniel, to surprise Emma with a thoughtful gesture. She was polite, a little guarded at first, but I quickly gained her trust by playing the doting husband card. After some small talk, I casually dropped a few hints about Daniel and Emma's business meetings. I could see the doubt forming in her eyes, and that was all I needed. Samantha agreed to come to the dinner, though I could sense her unease. It was perfect. The stage was set, and all the players were in place. Emma, Daniel, Samantha, our closest friends. None of them knew what was about to happen. The night of the dinner, I acted as if everything was normal. I helped Emma with the preparations, made sure the house looked perfect. When the guests arrived, I played the perfect host, pouring drinks, making small talk, keeping the atmosphere light. Emma was radiant, smiling, laughing, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. As the evening progressed, I slipped away for a moment, claiming I needed to check something in my office. That's when I retrieved the final piece of my plan, the DVDs. Each one contained footage from the hidden cameras, documenting Emma's meetings with Daniel in our home, in our bedroom. I also had a folder with printouts of their text messages, the GPS logs, and a neatly organized timeline of the affair. It was meticulous, undeniable. I rejoined the party, DVDs in hand. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then stood up, smiling at Emma. "I've been working on a little surprise," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Something I think we should all watch together." Emma's smile faltered slightly, but she still had no idea. I inserted the first DVD into the player, and as the footage began to play, the room fell silent. It took a moment for everyone to register what they were seeing. Emma and Daniel, together, in our home, in our bed. The gasps were audible, followed by stunned silence. Emma's face drained of color. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with horror. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting between the screen and Samantha, who was staring at him in shock. I didn't stop the DVD, I let it play. Every intimate moment, every stolen kiss, every betrayal. I wanted everyone to see the truth, to witness what she had done. When the DVD finally ended, I pulled out the folder and tossed it onto the table in front of her. "You've been busy," I said, my voice cold and detached. "But so have I," Emma stammered, trying to speak, but no words came out. Daniel looked like he wanted to bolt from the room, but he was trapped, just like Emma. Samantha stood up, tears streaming down her face, and stormed out without a word. Daniel followed her, leaving Emma alone to face the consequences. I wasn't finished yet. I pulled out a second envelope, this one containing the divorce papers and the results of a DNA test I had conducted on Ethan. The room seemed to shrink as I laid it all out. "This," I said, tossing the DNA results onto the table, "is proof that Ethan isn't mine. He's Daniel's." Emma collapsed into her chair, sobbing, her hands covering her face. I felt nothing as I watched her crumble. The room had gone deathly quiet, the weight of the revelation suffocating. With the final blow delivered, I walked out of the room, leaving her in the wreckage of her own making. The satisfaction I had anticipated didn't come immediately. Instead, there was a strange emptiness inside me, a hollowness that I hadn't expected. But it was done. Emma was destroyed, her life in ruins, and I had regained control. That was what mattered. At least, that's what I told myself. I stepped outside into the cool night air, letting the silence wash over me. The weight of everything that had happened settled onto my shoulders, but I knew this was only the beginning. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of everything I had set in motion settled around me. I had done it, destroyed the facade Emma had built, shattered her life, and torn away the lies. I should have felt victorious, triumphant, yet there was a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach, a nagging emptiness that refused to fade. But I couldn't afford to dwell on it, not now. Inside, Emma was facing the destruction I had so carefully orchestrated, her entire world crumbling before her eyes. Daniel had fled after Samantha stormed out, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. She was sobbing, broken, but I didn't look back. There was no satisfaction in watching her fall apart. Not anymore. I had anticipated this moment for so long, built my life around it for months. But now that it had arrived, it felt incomplete. I walked to my car, letting the silence of the evening settle over me. The truth was, the moment wasn't about Emma's humiliation or Daniel's cowardly retreat. It was about me. I had regained control of my life. I had taken back the power that Emma's betrayal had stolen from me. But something was gnawing at the edges of my mind, something I hadn't anticipated. The cost. I had won, but at what price? The aftermath unfolded quickly. Word spread through our social circles like wildfire. Emma's reputation was obliterated overnight. I heard whispers from friends, some offering sympathy, others expressing disbelief. They didn't know the full extent of what had happened, only the pieces they could gather from the wreckage of that evening. Emma was a pariah, her professional life in shambles. Clients distanced themselves from her, her once thriving real estate business withered within weeks. She moved out of the house the next day, too humiliated to face me again. I didn't protest, in fact, I welcomed the quiet. But the quiet didn't bring peace. Instead, it brought reflection. I found myself replaying the events over and over in my mind, not just the dinner, but everything that had led up to it. The months of deception, the lies, the secrets. And now, with the culmination of my revenge, there was a void. I had spent so much time focusing on Emma's destruction that I hadn't stopped to consider what would come after. The satisfaction I had expected never came. Instead, there was a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching my life from the outside, disconnected from the emotions that had once driven me. I threw myself into work, avoiding the empty house and the memories it held. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but they didn't ask questions. I had always been a private person, and now, more than ever, I kept my distance. It wasn't just Emma I had pushed away. It was everyone. Even Ethan. Ethan. He was the hardest part of all of this. He was still too young to understand what had happened, but the impact of my actions was clear. He hadn't seen the footage, hadn't heard the accusations, but he knew something was wrong. I could see it in his eyes when I picked him up for our weekend visits. He looked at me differently now, like he didn't know who I was anymore. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for him, tried to be the father he deserved, but it was hard. I couldn't shake the thought that every moment I spent with him was a reminder of Emma's betrayal. He wasn't my son, he was Daniel's. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who had taken everything from me. But it wasn't Ethan's fault. He was innocent in all of this. And yet, I couldn't help the growing distance between us. The guilt of it weighed heavily on me. I had always prided myself on being in control, on keeping my emotions in check. But when it came to Ethan, I was lost. The bond we once shared felt strained, fragile. I wanted to protect him from the truth, but the truth was already there, lurking in the shadows of our every interaction. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the full story, not yet, but I knew the day would come when he would ask questions, questions I wasn't ready to answer. How could I explain to him that the life he had known was built on lies, that the man he thought was his father wasn't? It was a burden I wasn't sure I could bear. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't faring much better. Samantha had left him, and his professional reputation took a hit as well. It turned out he had more skeletons in his closet than even I had anticipated. A few well-placed rumors, some carefully crafted suggestions to the right people, and his career began to unravel. It was almost too easy. I hadn't even needed to do much. The weight of his own indiscretions did most of the work. In a twisted way, I had dismantled both of their lives just as I had planned. Emma and Daniel were left with nothing but the wreckage of their choices. But where did that leave me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been so focused on revenge that I had lost sight of everything else. My life had become consumed by this need for control, for justice. But now that it was over, now that I had won, I didn't know who I was anymore. The person I had been before the betrayal, the husband, the father, the man with a stable life, was gone. In his place was someone I didn't recognize. Days turned into weeks, and the emptiness grew. I tried to move forward, to rebuild some semblance of a life, but it wasn't that simple. The emotional cost of my actions lingered, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I had regained control, yes, but at the expense of my own humanity. The cold detachment that had helped me execute my plan now left me feeling numb, disconnected from everything and everyone. Even when I saw Emma in passing, at a custody exchange with Ethan, or running into her by chance in town, there was no satisfaction. She looked like a shell of the person she once was, her confidence shattered, her eyes hollow. But it didn't bring me the closure I thought it would. Instead, it only deepened the emptiness inside me. I had destroyed her, just as I had set out to do. But in the process, I had destroyed something within myself as well. The turning point came one night, months after the dinner. I was sitting in the house alone, the silence pressing in around me, when I realized that I had isolated myself completely. There was no one left to turn to, no friends, no family. The person I had become was so consumed by revenge that I had pushed away anyone who might have been able to help me through it. I thought about the man I used to be, before the betrayal, before everything. I had been a husband, a father, a man with a future. But now all I had was the aftermath of my own choices. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. For the first time since the night of the dinner, I allowed myself to really feel the weight of it all. The grief, the anger, the regret. It hit me like a tidal wave, overwhelming and relentless. I had spent so long burying those emotions, locking them away behind the facade of control that I hadn't realized how much they had festered. I wasn't the same man anymore. The revenge that had driven me, the cold, calculated steps I had taken to destroy Emma and Daniel, had left me hollow. I had achieved everything I had set out to do, but in the process, I had lost everything that mattered. Sitting there in the dark, I realized that I needed to face the truth, not just about Emma and Daniel, but about myself. I had to confront the man I had become, the choices I had made, and the cost of those choices. I couldn't keep running from it, couldn't keep hiding behind the walls I had built around myself. The victory I had fought so hard for had come at a price, and that price was my own sense of self. I had destroyed the lives of the people who had betrayed me, but in doing so, I had also destroyed the life I had once known, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. In the days that followed, I began to take small steps toward healing. It wasn't easy, nothing about this journey had been, but I knew I had to try. I reached out to a therapist, someone who could help me process the emotional wreckage I had been carrying for so long. I started spending more time with Ethan, trying to rebuild the bond that had frayed in the aftermath of the revelations. It was slow, painful work, but it was necessary. I had lost so much, but I wasn't ready to lose everything. The revenge had been my way of taking control, of asserting my power in the face of betrayal. But now I had to find a way to take control of my own life again. Not through destruction, but through rebuilding. It would take time, it would take effort. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way forward. Not as the man I once was, but as the man I could still become. The moment I walked into that room, I knew it was over. Emma's eyes locked onto mine, a flicker of relief crossing her face, as if she thought my late arrival meant something positive. An apology, perhaps, or some reconciliation. But I wasn't here to mend things. I was here to finish what I had started. The air felt heavy, filled with the weight of conversations that had been cut short. The room was packed with friends and family, all seated around the long dining table, expectant smiles now wavering with uncertainty as I walked in with Daniel and Samantha trailing behind me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to do. I placed the envelope containing the DNA test results on the table and slid it across to Emma. The room grew silent. All eyes turned toward her. She stared at the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for it. She didn't open it. Her gaze shifted back to me, her expression pleading, desperate for me to stop whatever it was I had planned. "Alex, what is this?" Her voice was soft, fragile, as if the answer could break her. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked over to the TV where the DVD player was already loaded. I had prepared for this moment, had planned every detail down to the second. With the press of a button, the screen flickered to life, and the footage began to play. It was silent at first. The camera, hidden in the corner of our bedroom, showed Emma and Daniel entering the room, laughing, oblivious to the fact that their every move was being recorded. The laughter died as their intimate actions took over the screen. Emma's face drained of color. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes wide, panic coursing through him as he glanced around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. A collective gasp echoed through the room as the footage continued. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking away, others staring in shock. Emma was shaking now, her hand still resting on the unopened envelope. I turned the TV off, cutting the footage short, but the damage had already been done. There was no need for more. The silence that followed was suffocating. I walked back to my place at the table, my heart pounding, though I outwardly appeared calm. "I wanted everyone to see this," I said, my voice steady. "I wanted you all to know the truth." Emma's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her face was pale, her body trembling as the reality of the situation hit her with full force. "Alex, please," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I can explain." I shook my head, cutting her off before she could begin weaving the excuses I knew were coming. "It's too late for explanations, Emma. You've lied to me, to everyone here, for months. This, I gestured toward the TV, is the truth. Her sobs broke through then, loud and guttural, her body folding in on itself as if the weight of her guilt was physically crushing her. She turned to the people around her, eyes wide with desperation. Please, I didn't mean for it to happen like this. But there was no sympathy left for her in the room. Every friend, every family member sat frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and disgust. I didn't feel anything as I watched her fall apart. Not satisfaction, not anger, just emptiness. I reached for the envelope again and slid it across the table toward her. Open it. She hesitated, her hand still shaking, but after a long moment she tore open the seal and pulled out the paper inside. Her eyes skimmed the words, and then she let out a sharp cry, the paper slipping from her hands and floating to the floor. I didn't need to say anything. She knew what it meant. Everyone did. The DNA test, I said quietly. Ethan isn't mine. He's Daniel's. Her sobs grew louder, but I was already done. I stood, taking the divorce papers from my jacket pocket and placing them in front of her, ignoring the gasps from the guests as the final blow landed. Sign these. You're leaving tonight. I turned away then, walking toward the door, leaving her and Daniel to face the wreckage they had caused. Samantha followed me, her face pale but composed, while Daniel remained frozen, still trying to process what had just happened. The last thing I heard before I closed the door behind me was Emma's broken voice calling my name, but it was too late for that now. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself. I should have felt something. Relief, vindication, a sense of victory. But all I felt was a hollow numbness. The revenge I had so carefully crafted, the plan I had executed perfectly, had played out exactly as I'd intended. Emma's life was in ruins, her reputation destroyed, her future uncertain. Daniel would face the consequences too, both personally and professionally. They had both lost everything. And yet, standing there alone in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something too. The aftermath of that night unfolded quickly. Emma moved out of the house immediately, leaving behind the life she had once known. Her friends and family turned their backs on her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal that had erupted. She lost clients, lost respect, and soon she lost her career altogether. There was no salvaging what she had left. Her fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. Daniel wasn't spared either. Samantha left him, of course, and his professional life took a hit once the rumors of his affair spread. He tried to maintain his public image, but the damage was done. It turned out he wasn't as untouchable as Emma had once believed. I watched it all unfold from a distance, my hands clean, my conscience clear. I had set the wheels in motion, but I hadn't needed to do much after that night. Their own lies and betrayals had done most of the work for me. Still, I couldn't escape the lingering emptiness that followed me everywhere. I had regained control of my life, yes, but in doing so, I had severed ties with everything and everyone that had once mattered. Ethan, the son I had raised as my own, was no longer mine. I saw him less and less as the weeks went by, unable to face the reality of our fractured relationship. How could I be a father to him, knowing he was Daniel's, knowing that every time I looked at him, I would be reminded of Emma's betrayal? The house, once a place of comfort and stability, now felt cold and hollow. I spent most of my time avoiding it, throwing myself into work, trying to fill the void with distractions. But nothing worked. The silence was too loud, the emptiness too vast to ignore. I began to realize that in destroying Emma's life, I had destroyed something in myself as well. The months passed and the numbness didn't fade. I went through the motions of living, working, eating, sleeping, but it was all mechanical. The fire that had driven me, that had fueled my need for revenge, was gone, and in its place was a gaping hole that I didn't know how to fill. I started seeing a therapist, though I wasn't sure it would help. The sessions were slow, painful, but necessary. I had to confront the reality of what I had done, the choices I had made, and the consequences of those choices. I couldn't keep hiding from it. The therapist didn't offer any easy answers, but she helped me see that my need for control had come at a cost I hadn't fully understood. It wasn't just Emma's life that had been destroyed, it was mine too. Ethan became the focus of my healing. I knew I had to repair the bond we had once shared, even if I couldn't undo the damage that had been done. He was still my son, regardless of biology, and I owed it to him to be present, to be a father again. It wasn't easy. Every interaction was a reminder of the past, of the lies, but I couldn't let that define our relationship. I began to understand that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, doesn't bring peace. It doesn't erase the pain or the betrayal. It doesn't fill the void left behind. It simply leaves you with the aftermath, with the wreckage of a life that can never be the same. As I stood outside the house one evening watching the sunset over the horizon, I realized that my victory had been bittersweet. I had achieved everything I had set out to do, but in the process, I had lost something far more important: my sense of self, my ability to love, to trust, to connect. I didn't know if I would ever fully recover from the choices I had made, from the path I had taken, but I knew I had to try. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild not just my life, but myself. The revenge had been my way of taking control, of reclaiming the power I had lost. But now, I had to find a new way forward, one that didn't rely on destruction, but on healing. It would take time. It would take effort. But I was ready to face it, to confront the man I had become, and to find a way to move past the darkness I had created. I had won the battle, but the war within myself was far from over. The fallout from that evening was swift and absolute. The whispers started the moment I left the room. By the next morning, the rumors had spread like wildfire, and Emma's life began unraveling, exactly as I had planned. For weeks, I watched it all play out with a sense of detachment. I had engineered this collapse, set the pieces in motion, and now I was simply observing the consequences of my actions. Emma's reputation was shattered. The affair wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of the image she had cultivated for years. In our social circle, appearances were everything, and Emma had spent so long building herself up as the successful, loyal wife and businesswoman. That was all gone now. Clients stopped calling. Friends stopped inviting her to events. She was untouchable and not in the way she had once been. She tried to recover at first, reaching out to old contacts, pleading for sympathy. I heard through mutual friends that she'd even tried to explain away the affair, claiming it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, but no one was listening. People like to watch a fall from grace, especially when it's someone they once envied. Daniel didn't fare much better. Samantha left him almost immediately after the dinner, walking out of his life without a word. She didn't even give him the chance to explain himself. I heard from a friend of his that he was devastated, blindsided by how quickly it all unraveled. He had never imagined that his affair with Emma would become public, let alone that it would destroy everything. His career, too, took a hit. There were murmurs in his company, rumors about his integrity, whispers of inappropriate conduct. He was passed over for a promotion, and his reputation took a hit that he couldn't recover from. And me? I watched it all from a distance, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and something else, something I couldn't quite name. I had done what I set out to do. I had destroyed the people who betrayed me. But the more I watched their lives fall apart, the more I realized that it didn't bring me the closure I had expected. The emptiness inside me remained, untouched by their suffering. I tried to move on, to return to some semblance of normalcy, but nothing felt normal anymore. The house was too quiet without Emma, too large and empty. I had spent so many nights planning my revenge, consumed by thoughts of how to make her pay, that now, without that driving force, I felt adrift. Ethan was the only constant, though even my relationship with him had changed. He was still too young to fully understand what had happened, but he could sense the tension, the shifts in our lives. I tried to be there for him, to maintain some normalcy in his life, but it was hard. Every time I looked at him, I saw Daniel's face. It wasn't his fault, none of this was, but I couldn't shake the feeling of distance between us. He wasn't mine, not really, and that truth ate away at me more than I cared to admit. I took him for our usual weekend visits, played with him in the park, helped him with his schoolwork. But the bond we once had felt strained. I was going through the motions, trying to be the father he needed, but I wasn't sure if I could be that man anymore. The bitterness of betrayal had seeped too deep into my soul, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the shadow it cast over my life. It wasn't long before Emma reached out to me. I had expected it, of course. After everything she had lost, I knew she would come crawling back eventually. Her texts started as pleas for forgiveness, apologies that felt too little, too late. Then came the phone calls, voicemails filled with sobs and desperation. She wanted to meet, to talk, to explain. I ignored them all, but the messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. She told me she had nothing left, that she was living in a small apartment, barely scraping by. Her career was over, her friends had abandoned her, she was alone, and she wanted me to forgive her, to let her come back home. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Forgiveness was not something I had in me anymore. I had spent too long in the darkness, too long building my walls of control and power. I couldn't tear them down now, not for her, but one evening she showed up at the house. I was sitting in the living room, the TV on, but the volume muted, lost in my thoughts, when I heard the knock at the door. I knew it was her even before I opened it. She stood there, rain-soaked and pale, her eyes red from crying. "Alex, please, just hear me out." I said nothing, stepping aside to let her in. She walked in slowly, hesitating as if she didn't belong there anymore. She didn't. "I've lost everything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I ruined everything, but I don't know what to do anymore. I don't have anyone else." I watched her, the woman I had once loved, the woman I had built my life around, and felt nothing. She was a ghost, a shadow of the person she had been, and I couldn't find it in me to pity her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was selfish, I was stupid, but I never stopped loving you." I swear I didn't. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't reach me. I had heard them all before, in my head, during those long nights when I had imagined her apologies, her regrets. But now, standing in front of me, they felt hollow, meaningless. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice cold. "Why did you do it?" She looked down, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I was lost. I felt disconnected. You were always so controlled, so perfect, and I felt like I wasn't enough. I thought Daniel could give me something you couldn't, but it was a mistake, Alex. It was the biggest mistake of my life." I stared at her, trying to feel something, anger, hatred, sorrow, but there was only numbness. "You destroyed everything," I said quietly. "You destroyed us. And for what? For a lie?" She sobbed, collapsing onto the couch. I know I ruined it all. But I'm begging you, Alex, please, give me a chance to make it right. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me like this." Her words were desperate, broken, but I couldn't give her what she wanted. I had already left her, in every way that mattered. "There's no going back, Emma. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. I can't do this without you." "You'll have to." I turned away from her, walking toward the window, staring out at the rain as it dripped down the glass. Behind me, I heard her sobbing, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I had already lost too much, given up too much of myself in the process of destroying her. There was nothing left to give. Eventually, her sobs quieted, and I heard the sound of her standing up. She walked to the door, pausing for a moment, as if waiting for me to stop her. But I didn't. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence returned. I stood there for a long time, staring out into the rain, wondering if I had won it all. Emma was gone, her life in ruins, but so was mine. The revenge that had driven me, that had given me purpose, was over, and now I was left with the wreckage of what I had once been. I had regained control, yes, but at the cost of my own heart, my own soul. The rain continued to fall, relentless, washing away the remnants of the life I had destroyed. As I sat in the stillness of my home, I couldn't escape the reality of what I had done to him. The revenge, so meticulously crafted and executed, had played out exactly as I envisioned. Emma's life was in ruins. Daniel's reputation had crumbled. And yet, here I was, staring at the emptiness I had created, not just in her life, but in mine as well. It had been months since the final confrontation. Emma had long since disappeared from our social circles, retreating into a life I could only assume was filled with regret and bitterness. Daniel, too, had faded into the background, his career damaged beyond repair, his future uncertain. Everything I had set out to destroy had fallen apart, just as I had planned. But the question that lingered in my mind, haunting me in the quiet hours of the night, was this: was it worth it? I had won. That much was clear. I had regained control, seized back the power that Emma's betrayal had taken from me. But in the process, I had lost so much more. The bond I once shared with Ethan, the love I once felt for Emma, the life I had spent years building, it was all gone, replaced by this cold, hollow victory. I had thought revenge would bring closure, that seeing her destroyed would somehow fill the void her betrayal had left in me. But instead, it only deepened it. Each day, I woke up to the same gnawing emptiness, the same sense that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The man I had been before, the husband, the father, the person capable of love and connection, was gone, replaced by someone colder, harder. I wasn't sure if I could ever be that man again. As the months passed, I tried to move forward. I focused on work, on rebuilding the parts of my life that hadn't been touched by Emma's betrayal. But it wasn't enough. There was always something missing, a lingering sense that I had sacrificed too much in my quest for revenge. Ethan was the hardest part. He was still young, still innocent in so many ways, but I couldn't shake the distance that had grown between us. Every time I looked at him, I saw Daniel. I saw the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. I had raised him, loved him, but now it was impossible to separate him from the truth of where he came from. I tried to be a good father, tried to maintain some semblance of a normal relationship with him, but the bond we once shared felt strained, artificial. I couldn't look at him the way I used to, couldn't see him as my son anymore. And that was perhaps the greatest loss of all. One evening, as we sat together in silence, Ethan looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion. "Dad," he said softly, "why don't we talk like we used to?" His question cut through me like a knife. I had no answer for him, at least not one that he would understand. How could I explain the emotional chasm that had opened between us, the betrayal that had shattered our family, without burdening him with the weight of it all? "I'm sorry, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "I've just been distracted lately." "It's not your fault." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't convinced, and I couldn't blame him. He felt the distance, even if he didn't fully understand it. That night, after I put him to bed, I sat in the darkness of the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The victory I had fought so hard for now felt like a curse. I had regained control of my life, but in doing so, I had lost the things that mattered most. The love, the trust, the connection, all of it was gone, and I was left alone in the ruins of my marriage, my family, my life. I thought back to the man I had been before all of this, the man who had loved Emma, who had built a life with her, who had trusted her completely. That man was gone, replaced by someone colder, more calculated. The revenge had consumed me, shaped me into something I didn't fully recognize. I had spent so long planning Emma's downfall, so long focused on her destruction, that I hadn't stopped to think about what would happen to me in the aftermath. Now, with her out of my life, I was left to pick up the pieces of my own shattered existence. I couldn't go back. That much was clear. The life I had once known was over, and I had to accept that. But what lay ahead for me? Could I rebuild something new, something better? Or was I doomed to live in the shadow of my revenge, forever haunted by the choices I had made? The truth was, I didn't know. I wasn't sure if I could ever truly move on from what had happened, if I could ever rebuild the parts of myself that had been destroyed in the process. The emptiness, the numbness, it was all consuming and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to fill it again. In the end, I had to face the reality of what I had done. I had won, but in winning, I had lost something far more important. My ability to trust, to love, to connect with others had been shattered, and I wasn't sure if I would ever get it back. As I sat there in the darkness, I realized that the victory I had fought so hard for had come at a price I hadn't fully understood. I had destroyed Emma, yes, but I had also destroyed myself in the process. Now, as I stood at the edge of this new chapter of my life, I couldn't help but wonder, was the revenge worth it? Or had I sacrificed too much in my quest for control? The answer, I knew, was something I would have to live with for the rest of my life. And as I walked away from the ruins of my marriage, from the wreckage of everything I had once held dear, I couldn't shake the feeling that some wounds never truly heal. Some scars never fade. And maybe, just maybe, I was one of them.